He's president of the ACT chapter in Jacksonville, and he drove all the way down to be with us from Jacksonville today. He's also a mentor for ACT nationwide, and he's going to present to us some background, some facts on the threat to America, including local threats. So with that, I give you Aunt Randy.
First, I want to thank all y'all for coming out here on a Friday night to listen to what I have to say. I want to thank Jerry for calling me and asking me, inviting me down here. And I look around, I see a room full. Hopefully, I see a room full of patriots. Obviously, they're here. How many of you in this room raise your hand if you believe that America is the greatest country on the face of this earth? Please, see you show hands. All right, so I'm in the right room. How many of you think that America has real enemies? Raise your hand, please. That we have enemies that want to destroy us in our way of life. We have real threats. And I'm going to discuss a few of those threats tonight. And one of the presentations I was going to go through is on the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm going to give you a real brief. And I think, how many of this room have heard Jonathan Matusa speak before? Raise your hands. So quite a few. All right, because I don't want to regurgitate a lot of information, but I want to give you a real quick overview of who the Muslim Brotherhood is, very quickly. After I give you a quick overview of who the Muslim Brotherhood is and why they exist, I'm going to lay out some of the groups. Now, when I speak on radical Islam, what people like to term radical Islam, although the King of Jordan said, there is no radical Islam, there is no moderate Islam, there is only Islam, period. All authoritative texts have no radical Quran and some moderate Quran, or some radical Sharia, some non-radical or moderate Sharia. There's only Sharia. In fact, Hassan Shibli of CARE, Tampa, said there is no Islam without Sharia, and no Sharia without Islam to me one day when we were talking. I have other imams on the record for saying the same things. Sharia is the enemy threat doctrine. It is the driving force and what drives the world Islamic movement worldwide at the global level. We are seeing over 50 countries with violence in all of them. We are seeing jihadi martyrs, not suicide bombers, but martyrs, who are killing themselves and others, non-Muslims, in the cause of Allah. They have a doctrine they go by. Every one of them say that they did it in accordance with Sharia and the cause of Allah. So we need to start looking back, and everything is pointing back to the Sharia. I think it's a good idea that we understand what Sharia really is. Because Sharia is more than just a bunch of what the Muslim Brotherhood talking points are. And here in Florida, we have American laws for American courts going through. And for the last 3 years, it's passed the House and the Senate subcommittees and been stopped because the Senate President not brought it up for an up or down vote. It's a law that will protect all American citizens, including Muslims, who come to America to get away from barbaric Sharia laws. And those are the ones that hurt most by this law not being enacted, because what it does is it protects U.S. citizens from any foreign law which violates our state constitutions or our federal constitutions. And if you don't think it's happening, Frank Gaffney, Centers for Security Policy, did a study on over 50 of the most egregious examples in all states. Florida had 4 of those cases. In addition to that, it's also being done through our legal system on a daily basis, not once in a while, but daily, through comedy, through choice of venue, and choice of law. And I'll get into some of that, don't let me forget if I skip over it. So I want to explain how Sharia is being implemented in the United States and enforced by our courts and U.S. Marshals on U.S. citizens without due process, violating their U.S. constitutional rights. It's very important that this law gets passed, and it's going through the judiciary record. We just passed the judiciary. It's got 3 more panels to go for, so we'd love to get behind that bill when the time comes. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded and started, and basically every single jihadist group overseas, including Al-Qaeda, was spawned out of the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, all of them. Those same jihadi groups are working inside the United States. Groups like CARE, the Islamic Society of North America, the Islamic Circle of North America, the Muslim Student Association, Muslim American Society, North American Islamic Trust, and others. And we know factually in a court of law that these groups are Muslim Brotherhood entities, and some of them are part of the Palestine Community, factually Hamas entities. How do we know that? Because we have gleaned treasure troves and captured thousands of enemy documents. In Annandale, Virginia, One of the cases, and one of the documents we'll discuss briefly, is called the Strategic Goal for the Group in North America, which lays out an 18-point plan how to subvert and destroy the United States from within. And it lists members of the groups at the time this was captured. And you got to understand this document's over 27 years old, of those groups. Those groups listed in that document, which was used in the Holy Land Foundation trial of 2008, the largest, most successfully prosecuted terrorism finance trial in U.S. history, lists the main groups that our government now uses as their go-to people to tell us what we can and cannot say about Islam. The same groups that have silenced professionals who understand the enemy and the enemy threat doctrine, and we now have leaders inside these Muslim Brotherhood organizations, inside the Department of Homeland Security, inside the Department of Justice, inside the DOD, telling us what we can and cannot say, again, about Islam. So basically, effectively, enforcing Islamic slander laws on us. Because Islamic slander laws, according to the Reliance of the Traveler, is anything that a Muslim would not like to hear. Anything that is against the Prophet Muhammad or the Quran, whether it be factual or not, if they wouldn't like it to be heard, they don't want you to know about it, they're going to tell us what we're allowed to know about Islam and what we're not allowed to know about Islam. That is Islamic slander law. And we're going to get into some of that stuff. Now, what happened to set the Muslim Brotherhood and rebirth or respark the Muslim Brotherhood was Ataturk, the head of Turkey, several years ago, back in 1926, 24, 26, I can't remember, basically secularized Turkey. And he outlawed the hijab. He outlawed the call to prayer, the azan. He outlawed praying in the streets. He secularized and westernized Turkey. That peeved off some of the folks that were more Sharia adherent. Hassan al-Banna in 1928 spawned the Muslim Brotherhood with only two major stated goals. One, to spread Islamic Sharia worldwide, and two, to reestablish the global Islamic state. Keyword being global. So those are the only two objectives. Every jihadist group that's part of the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, all share those two objectives. And basically you have to understand, when you're looking at Islam, and I'll give you a brief history, the first 13 years Islam was taught, and we can say it was taught as a religion if you want. The Dawah phase, the proselytizing phase. The Prophet Muhammad knew that he had to get along to go along. All the peaceful verses in the Quran, the first 90 chapters of the Quran, all the peaceful verses come from the first Meccan period. This is very important to understand because what we call it progressive revelation. Some people have heard the word abrogation. Have anybody heard that word in here before? Okay, one. The later verses have authority over the earlier verses. Now, we in the West tend to think things very linear, very logically. And if something is black and something is white, they're incompatible. If I say it's up and you say it's down, the two can't be right simultaneously. Not so in Islam. We have to get out of our way of thinking about things in the Western world because we do think in that linear Western secularized or Western worldview. What I mean by that is the early Quran, people often hear recited as Surah 2256. There's no compulsion, there's no compulsion of religion, exactly. And 109:6, to your religion, to me my own. The last verse on religion is Surah 539, which says, fight and oppose disbelievers until all submit, and all religion is for Allah only. Meaning no tolerance, no other religions. Which one can be true? We hear both recited. In Islam, if you're in the earlier phase of the Hijrah, the migration to conquer enemy land, then you can say the earlier verse, to deceive. However, Al-Qaeda, which is in the third phase of jihad, the offensive jihad, they say, hey, it's time to fight right now. And you remember a couple years ago, the Albanian Osmakak, who was arrested in Tampa, was going to have a bomb. He was Al-Qaeda, and he was honoring Ahmad Badirin, saying, your Islam's not real, my Islam's more real than your Islam. They're both bad guys. They both share the same two objectives. Al-Qaeda came out of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they both share the same two objectives, that we want to spread Sharia law worldwide, and we reestablish the global Islamic State. So how could you have two guys that are supposed to be on the same team, share the same objectives, saying one's condemning the other one, the other one going, look, I'm a good guy. We're really a civil rights group. We're really not Hamas. We're the good guys. Look, even Al-Qaeda hates us. How does that happen? Because the Muslim Brotherhood, the groups here in the United States, it's not the tactics or timing. It's not time to use violence in their mind. They're at a different level. They're at the defensive jihad phase. They're at the second phase. So there's 3 phases. The first phase is the first Meccan period. 150 followers, 13 years of teaching the religion. I use that word loosely. 13 years, only 150 followers. Muhammad and his followers would run out of Mecca violently. He goes into Medina, and what happens? Now, we're talking 13 years down the road. He goes into Medina, and he becomes a political leader, and then a military leader. And within 2 years, he's driven out 2 of the Jewish tribes that welcomed him in, and the third tribe, the Qurayza tribe, he beheads all the men. Until the morning, with his child right beside him, he lopped off 800 to 900 heads, according to Islamic history and documents. And then, this was the offensive or defensive jihad stage. He went out and raided caravans, came back, but that was considered defense, because they were oppressed because non-Muslims were coming through their caravans. In their presence, it was offensive. So, they used defensive jihad. Afterwards, he took his 10,000-man army, marched back into Mecca, conquered Mecca. In the last 10 years of Muhammad's life, he was in a major battle every 6 weeks until he died. And at his death, the Arabian Peninsula was purged virtually of every Christian and Jew, and all jihad was offensive at that point. That's a brief history, just giving you a cursory overview before we get into this. So you have to understand that what the Prophet Muhammad did is what the Muslim Brotherhood is looking at. They look at the Prophet Muhammad and his commandments, and those writings by Muslim and Bukhari, which are the most authoritative writings in all, second only to the Quran. Those are the people you look at. So if you want to understand Islam, what it really is, you look at Muslim, you look at Bukhari, and then you also look at the last, chronologically, the last writing. And that's what we do. So everything that I'm going to talk about, I look at Islamic writings, authoritative Islamic writings, written by Muslims for a Muslim audience. That's how you understand. Now the Muslim brother would tell you, have you ever experienced a Muslim? Have you ever met one? Somehow you cannot understand the Islamic doctrine of Hijrah, or the Islamic doctrine of jihad, without a personal experience with Muslim. Well, first of all, I have a personal experience with many Muslims. Some good, some that are fighting with us against Sharia, like Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, a lot of former Muslims that are friends of mine. So we are working with Muslims in here that do want to embrace true democracy. Unfortunately, those Muslims that are talking about reforming Islam do not have a legal leg or footing to stand on, because you cannot reform Islam. We'll get into some of that on how the law was adopted and why this is the case. At that point, where do I want to go from there? Now, how many people have heard Muslims say that they condemn terrorism? Raise your hands, please. Raise them high. Exactly. So, now how many of you, keep your hands raised, how many of you that have heard that believe those are good, moderate Muslims? Keep your hands up. Okay, some of you. Now, how many in the room that heard that think they were just misleading you? Drop your hands if you don't. So there's a few that believe they were misleading, and some believe they were honest. They were being 100% genuine. And I'm not here to bash individual Muslims, because I have, like I said, individual Muslims are friends. I have a friend of mine just went out and got a crescent moon star tattooed on his shoulder, tells me he's a Muslim, and I know more in my pinky than he knows in his body. He doesn't pray 5 times a day, the 5 Fard prayers. He's not cursing me in those prayers, and the Jews 5 times a day. He doesn't have his Abida from doing that. He's not adherent. He's not in the mosque every Friday. So, I call him a cultural Muslim, or a Mino. Muslim in name only, kind of like our rhinos. We got a few of those running around. Those Muslims who say they condemn terrorism are 100% factually correct. They do. What you have to understand is the war that we're fighting is information battle space. Most of the war defined by our enemy is an information battle. And what they mean by that, they are subverting us using political warfare, subversion, and influence operations at our foundational levels, infiltrating our political system, our education system, our churches, and our media to deceive, to conquer. Now, I talked about the strategic goal for the group in North America. In that, it says that the jihadist process in America is a settlement process. The Ikhwan al-Muslimin, or the Muslim Brotherhood, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad, and destroying and eliminating our miserable house from within by their hands, meaning us, and the hands of the believers until it's victorious and all religion is only for Allah. Meaning, no tolerance. This is in the document I told you, the strategic goal for the North America. It also goes on to talk about the Islamic centers and mosques as being the axis of their movement, where they will supply their battalions. That word alone, listen to it, supply our battalions. It says that the mosques are just as they were for the Prophet in his day, meaning they were forward operating bases. Everything was conducted in the mosque and the Islamic center. The judicial, their marriages, their divorces, their capital punishment, planning for warfare, you name it, it was conducted out of the mosque. Weapons, munition storage, etc. So you have to understand what we're dealing with, and you have to also understand who owns the mosque. If it's owned by the North American Islamic Trust, which is the bank for the Muslim Brotherhood inside the United States, then that is a Muslim Brotherhood front group, and that particular mosque is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. We know factually that over 50% of the mosques inside the United States are owned, in fact, by the North American Islamic Trust, that being a conservative estimate. Actually, it's a little higher than that, but I'm going to be conservative. And we know that we have over 2,100 Islamic centers inside the United States. So it's crucial to understand who owns those mosques. Now, I know I jumped off on a tangent. What was I on just before I went in there? Defining terrorism. Okay, words. The information battle space. Why words are so important. How many of you how many of you are in Tea Party besides the Republican Club? Are there any Tea Parties in here? All right. I want to bring this up because how many of you know that in a national lexicon, the FBI, the intelligence, the national intelligence lexicon, they took the word enemy out of that lexicon and replaced it with violent extremists? How many understand the significance of that? Raise your hand. 2 of you. 3 of you. Okay. It's very significant for a reason. Language and words have meaning, and most of what we're finding is languages and nuances with languages. So if I am a law enforcement agent, or if I am a law enforcement officer, or if I am in the military, I swear an oath, which I was in the Marine Corps, and I was in counterintelligence, I swore an oath to protect and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You remove the word enemy. And now, if you tell me to go attack the Tea Party, and enemy is my word, and I say, wait a minute, they're not the enemy. They're talking Constitution. They're talking apple pie. They're talking about Second Amendment rights. These are not violent extremists. Now I take the word and say, well, they're not the enemy. They're violent extremists. It changes in my mind these people when they gather. We have a bunch of violent extremists. Anybody could be a violent extremist. Now it takes the meaning of the word, twist it, and makes it more palatable for law enforcement, military, or whatever to attack and go into that crowd and take people that are standing for the Constitution. It's the word language. I'll give you another point. In 2006, the 9/11 Commission came out. They used words like jihad, Hezbollah, Hamas, radical Islam, and other words. In 2006, the Muslim Political Action Committee, run by the Half-Out Brothers, which is a Muslim Brotherhood front group, which is heavily influencing Hollywood, also within our intelligence apparatus, said words have meanings. We don't like the language. We want to change it. 3 years later, flash forward to 2009, 36 words that we use to identify our enemy completely eradicated, 100%, from both the FBI lexicon and the National Intelligence Lexicon, including the word jihad. So how do you defeat an enemy you're not allowed to define? If I cannot call my enemy and call them out, and I have documents, I like to go into much greater detail in this, and if we have the PowerPoint, I will show you the national intelligence documents. I will show you with the government stamps on it, the documents I'm talking about. So right now, you're just unfortunately going to have to take my word for what I have. But these are documents that were entered into evidence in the Holy Land Foundation. These are exhibits in the Holy Land Foundation, and anything that you can get online and see for yourself. And we're not talking a couple documents. We're talking tens of thousands of documents. Now, to lay out what happened and how the Holy Land Foundation is set up and why this is important, in a moment I'm going to get into that. But other words that we hear. So terrorism is the unjust killing. We didn't define that yet. But terrorism under Islamic doctrine is the unjust killing of Muslim only. So of course I do not want you to kill me and my fellow jihadis. So when you hear a martyr, there's usually when an Islamist, a jihadist or Islamist speaks, there's one message for the non-Islamic world, one that's palatable to us, and then there's one that the jihadis understand. So when I say as a Muslim, listen, I condemn terrorism. I absolutely mean it. I don't want you killing me or my fellow Muslims. Now, the only just means to kill a Muslim is if he's an apostate, a homosexual, etc. Those are capital offenses. So if he's an enemy of the state, keyword being state, he leaves Islam, he's not an enemy of the religion, he's an enemy of the state according to the Islamic law manual. And this is a desktop reference, by the way. There are volumes of books that go with this. So when I look up apostate in this book, it will tell me enemy of the state. Other words, like innocent or human beings, we do not make the grade. If you know, how many Muslims are in this room? Raise your hand. Care members? We had a couple of care members who were supposed to come, but they show up, I would hope. Unfortunately, they didn't. So, anybody who is not a Muslim is not innocent, according to Islamic doctrine, Islamic law. This isn't Randy talking. This is Islamic law. Also, if you are non-Muslim, you are subhuman, you're ifasiq. There are 5 types of animal that have to be killed. The kite, the scorpion, the crow, the rabid dog, and one other. I can't remember what it is right now at the moment. But we are lower than all of those. Those are fasiq, we are ifasiq, and we are subhuman according to Islamic doctrine. And this comes right out of the tafsir, which is in greater reference to this. So we have to understand that there are different meanings in different languages. And I'll show you another point. Sir, would you do me a favor and tell me the name of the author in the bottom left corner of this book?
Yahya Emerick.
All right, Yahya Emerick, very good job. And the name of the book is the what?
Understanding, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Understanding Islam.
The Complete Idiot's Guide to Understanding Islam. This is written by Yahya Emerick. He is an American convert to Islam, or revert. Actually, they believe that everybody in the room was actually born a Muslim, and when you come back to Islam, you're a revert. This book right here is what Islam is all about. Can you tell me what the name on that author is? Yahya Emerick, same guy. This is important because it illustrates what I'm talking about, 2 messages. This is the one that's sold at Amazon. This is the one that we're allowed to read. This is going to tell you what you're allowed to know about Islam. This book by the same gentleman, What Islam is All About, is the #1 book being sold to madrasas or schools inside the United States teaching Muslim children. Inside this book you will find, if not subversive, I would call it treasonous information. Information that tells students in America not to listen to man-made law, but to listen to Allah's law only, Sharia, because the highest form of disbelief is man-made law because we are elevating ourselves to the level of God. So we are all basically committing shirk, the highest offense in Islam, and deserve to die capital punishment. This book also takes, and this is a page out of the book, this one here is comparing our executive, legislative, and judicial system to Islamic Qadi, the Caliphate, and the Shura councils, the legal councils. And they're teaching children about this, comparing it to this in American schools. And in addition to that, it will go on to say several disturbing things. I'm going to try to see if I can flip through one real quick. Muslims dream of establishing the power of Islam in the world. Muslims of all types and backgrounds agree that the Islamic system is the best for humanity in this life. Even non-Muslim writers, such as Bertrand Russell, even Napoleon, have said that the Islamic system is the best order for the ordering the human affairs. But how do we regain what our ancestors lost? How do we once again build our ummah, or the nation, into a shining example for all people? When we look at the model of Muhammad, the first 13 years of his mission were devoted to building a core of dedicated followers who would go through fire and ice if they had to. Then when the dominant society could stand no more, the existence of righteous people in their midst, the Muslim community refloated to a more friendly environment where Islam was the governing system. This is Medina. By the way, this is when the Islamic calendar starts. Not 13 years earlier when the religion was established, but when Muhammad became a political leader and a military leader. There Islam flowered into a civilization. Islam became a nation, not a religion, but a nation. But it could have only happened with strong, dedicated followers. And then it goes on to talk about how to conquer, basically, and rule in non-Islamic lands. I'll give you some more examples in a moment when I go through the presentation on that. But what's important here is that you understand that there's always 2 messages, typically, when you hear moderation from an Islamist. So, those Muslims like Dr. Zuki Jasser of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, if he deviates, if he says anything that goes against Islamic Sharia law, he himself is an apostate. So after 10 years at 9/11, he got out and rallied and asked Muslims, Christians, Jews to come together. He had 50 people show up at the foot of the towers. 2 of them were Muslims, himself and his wife. The rest were Jews and Christians. And several years later, my friend is still running the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and he has less than a dozen followers. We have less than a dozen moderates, what we call moderates, who are standing against barbaric Sharia. Why is that? So you have to ask yourself, what are the fundamental drivers that are keeping our community silent, our Islamic community silent on these issues? What are the fundamental drivers that are keeping them from standing up boldly? And can they reform Islam? Now, to understand a couple things, you have to understand Islamic law. Can you guys hear me pretty good without the speaker? Okay. 2 things I want to show you. This is the Islamic law manual. The Umdat al-Salik, or Alliance of the Traveler. Has anybody been into the law office? Any lawyers in the room? No lawyers in the room, okay. Anybody have been into a law office before? Raise your hand. A few of you. Basically, typically, there's a desktop reference. The desktop reference will have certain things in it. But behind them, usually is a wall full of volumes of books, like I mentioned a moment ago. Well, just like that, this book has volumes behind it. Now, is this authoritative Islamic law that I hold in my hand? How do you know? Well, first of all, the oldest, and the Muslims are credited with inventing the university system. The oldest university in the world is Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt. It's over 1,000 years old. If you, as a Muslim, attend Al-Azhar University, this is an Islamic jurisprudence university, you are in the top 1% of all Muslims in the world in understanding Islamic jurisprudence, or what law. If you study there. If you teach there, you're in the top 1% of that 1%. It means you know your stuff. This book is the only authoritative English-Arabic translation. So you can't be accused of taking things out of context. When I talk, I'm talking out of their legal manual. It bears the seal of approval of Al-Azhar University, oldest, most respected university in the world, bar none, on Islamic law. In addition, it bears the seal of approval in the opening pages of the Grand Mufti of Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. It also bears the seal of approval of the Fiqh Council, or Legal Council, of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And then it bears the Fiqh Council of America, Jamal Badawi, who has lived right here in America and speaks often right here in Central Florida at UCF. In fact, I was drugged out of there by 3 officers for questioning him by their hands, violating my First Amendment rights, and shutting me down because I simply asked a question after he said there was, Dean Electric of Impact said there was no such thing as stoning. He said there was no jihad, basically. And I questioned him on it and cited this book. Now, this book also bears the seal of approval of the International Institute of Islamic Thought. The International Institute of Islamic Thought coined the word Islamophobia. Anybody heard that word? Because I'm an Islamophobe, according to them. So they coined this. The OIC, and there are 2 main drivers in the world. At the global level, we have, everybody's heard of the United Nations, the largest international organization in the world. The second largest international organization behind the United Nations is the OIC. Anybody heard of the OIC? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3. OIC stands for the Organization of Islamic Cooperative. The OIC is 57 Islamic states. They meet every year, including Palestine. They meet every year to discuss the direction of Islam. And often you hear Islamists say, we don't have a pope. We don't have any guiding force. We don't have any direction. We're just, every country's its own and every Sharia is its own. And it's all different. You can't understand it. It's this mystic thing that you just really can't grasp what Sharia is. It's nonsense. Sharia law is like federal code. It is law. And it has volumes and volumes of legal codes and books that go into deep detail into Sharia law. And it has consensus, or ijma. And it's had ijtihad, human reasoning. I'm going to explain this in a second, exactly how the law came about. How much time do I have to speak, Ms. Guerrero?
Yes,
Okay. To get into the law, and I'm covering Sharia in depth, and I'm trying to kind of go this because this is very important because for you to understand. So when you get into a discussion, you're not going to get led astray by some of this stuff. Now,
all the schools, people say, well, you know, there's Shias and there's Sunnis and some are nice and some aren't nice and they all disagree and they just don't agree. Nonsense. This book talks about right in the front. There are 4 schools of Sunni schools, the Hanbali, Hanafi, Maliki, and Shafi. Both major Shia schools, which are actually 4, but the major schools which govern everything, all agree 100% on this book. There are minor differences in minor aspects of the law, but on all major law, including the doctrine of jihad and the doctrine of migration to conquer enemy lands, there is no disagreement whatsoever. 75% of this book is 100% agreed on, and the other 25% is minor law, like zakat. Muslims give to zakat. CARE collects zakat fi sabilillah, which is, by the way, goes only to jihad. Fi sabilillah means in the cause of Allah, those fighting in the cause of Allah. So your CARE chapters right here in Tampa, they advertise fi sabilillah, means all their money goes to what we call terrorism against ourselves. So all the schools, both Sunni and Shia, agree on this book, agree on the law in this book, and then it goes into detail on what those laws are, from everything to how you sleep, which direction you face, how you brush your teeth, to conquering enemy lands, to obligatory lying, to permissible lying, to kind of interesting that you are obligatory. If the action is obligatory, Muslim has to lie. They don't have a choice. So if it's part of the jihad, they have to lie. If it's part of the migration, they have to lie. Every Sharia adherent Islams. If they are obeying the tenets of their faith, they have to deceive non-Muslims to further the faith. They don't have a choice. The other interesting thing is a lot of Islam, how the law came about. About 1,000 years ago, all the scholars of the day, they didn't know which hadiths were factual, which were fake hadiths, which were weak hadith, which were strong hadith. The strongest hadith, by the way, are by Bukhari first, and then Muslim. If it's by those two, it's second only to the Quran itself. But the Quran, a lot of us think that the Quran is the Bible of Islam. It is not. It is the Word of God of Islam. But the triune, the whole Islam is made up of a trilogy. It's the Sirah, biography of Muhammad. It is the Hadith, or the traditions of Muhammad, what he did, what he actually did. And then it's also the Quran. Those 2 books, the Sirah and Hadith, make up what's called the Sunnah. The Sunnah and the Quran make up what Islam is and is not. By the way, 60% of that book trilogy deals with those outside the faith of Islam. Dominance over those outside the faith of Islam. Only 14% of that book actually deals with religion itself. Pretty interesting. And quite a bit of it deals with jihad. So, jihad is a big component of what Islam is and what Islam is not. Now, what happened? How Islamic law was established? They didn't know which hadith were real, which hadith were fake. So, Uthman, who was the caliph at the time, tasked his scribe to collect all the hadith, and they got all the scholars of the day together. And they got together and they did what's called ijtihad, or human reasoning. They went through all these hadith, and they said, well, these are all fake. Let's throw those out right off the bat. Let's go through that and figure that out. Now we've narrowed it down to what we know was probably said by the Prophet Muhammad. Now, out of that, which ones are weak hadith and which ones are strong? And they rated them, and they voted. And they had to have 100% unanimous consensus, or ijma, in order to make it into Islamic law and to make it into what Islam is and is not. So, again, just remember that once the gates to ijtihad, human reasoning, were closed 1,000 years ago, there is no more. Once there is 100% scholarly, and that's specified in the law manual, that once all the scholars of a specific time get together and make their ruling, and there is ijtihad and consensus, ijma, it can never be modified again. That's it. The gates of ijtihad are closed. So what we have now are interpretations called fatwas. They are interpretations of the law. It's kind of like our Constitution. What it's supposed to be is a republic. So we have laws, the Constitution, and we are supposed to render judgments and decide what falls within the purview of that law. We can rule on, we can vote on. If it falls outside the purview of that law, then we can't vote on it. We're not supposed to be able to vote on it and move outside those lines. So like murder. Well, our Judeo-Christian values are against murder. We are not allowed to murder. We are never going to be able to vote murder in and say, okay, we can murder. That's against the law. So even if we had everybody in America said, you know what, we think murder should be okay. If someone violates my daughter, then everybody should be able to just go out and vigilante kill them. Well, guess what? That violates the Constitution. It violates our law. That violates our Judeo-Christian values. It does not fly. It's never going to fly. That's kind of what you're looking at when you look at the Sharia. You have laws that you have to live in being confined with, if you understand. And those laws can no longer be changed. So it's important to understand that the law is the law is the law. Now that we understand that, I talked about American laws for American courts earlier and why it was important. Now, some of the talking points of my Islamist friends at CARE, United Voices for America, Emerge USA here in Florida, the three leading groups, all by the way, all came out of CARE. They're all the same group, basically. They've spun it off. All of them said, hey, this is going to violate, and if you pass this law, you're not going to be able to do, first of all, international law. It's going to affect business. It's going to affect international commerce. It's going to affect Jewish halakha law. They're not going to be able to perform marriages. It's going to affect Catholic canon law. Nonsense. First of all, what it says is that if the law violates the state constitutions or the U.S. Constitution, then that law cannot be used in a court. Doesn't negate any aspect of Sharia that doesn't violate the state law. So even Muslims who want to get married in accordance with Sharia will be allowed to do so. However, those Muslims who want to fly back to Saudi Arabia, get a divorce without due process for the wife here in the United States, and then he gets to come back and enforce that law through comedy in our court, and then he takes possession of the children, he takes possession of all the wealth, and the woman's put out penniless with no support, that's not going to fly anymore once this law is passed. That's just one instance. Another instance would be in New Jersey. In New Jersey, a couple of years ago, a gentleman beat his wife to the point of hospitalization and took her physically, raped her. In accordance with Islamic law, a Muslim is allowed to beat his wife. According to Islamic doctrine, he is allowed to plow his tilth as he pleases, meaning his wife is like a field to be plowed as he wants, when he wants. So he took his wife, he plowed his tilth, and took his wife and beat her to the point of hospitalization, and the judge ruled in his favor because of his religious liberties. This happened in New Jersey. Thankfully, the appellate court overturned that decision. So, does Islamic law happen? Yes. Another case that happened in Maryland, which was pretty egregious, a woman was from Pakistan, they were getting divorced, and she was now living with another man, which is adultery, which is a stoning offense in Pakistan, under Pakistani law. She would be killed for this if she went back. They said the jurisdiction was in Pakistan, and that she needed to go back to Pakistan, or, because he came back with a decree, he went to Pakistan, got a decree, said, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you 3 times, which is all that's required of the husband, was divorced, came back to America, showed the order to a judge, the judge issued it to the sheriff went out and enforced the order against the lady. She fought it in the court in Maryland, and the Maryland court said, no, you should go back to Pakistan. Even knowing that she could be killed for adultery, ruled against her, and the husband had her children. That was a case that happened in Maryland. So this is how Islamic law is being applied in America. Another way that it used to be applied here in the United States was through lawfare. Authors that were writing. Anybody heard of Rachel Ehrenfeld? She wrote a book on how basically Islamic finance or Sharia-compliant finance is being used as a Trojan horse to insinuate Sharia law inside the United States and subvert our institutions and put them in the service of the Muslim Brotherhood. She wrote a book about that and was sued by authors out of London. Rich Saudis would go over and sue authors here in the United States. It also happened to Joe Kaufman, who lives in South Florida, who writes for Front Page Magazine. Act for America got involved and were able to pass Rachel's Law in New York, so that could no longer happen, and we were able to get a free speech amendment passed here in Florida a couple of years ago, so people can no longer be sued from out of country by these guys and using lawfare to silence us. Now, nuisance laws are still being used, and unfortunately many of our law enforcement do not understand that what's going on, like UCF, where I was drug out for somebody asking a question. Now, I was very respectful, stood up. I said, Mr. Badawi, my question's for you because your organization has a seal of approval inside this book. It talks about Book 090, the Book of Justice, Jihad is Islamic warfare against non-Muslims to establish a religion, and then it cites three Quranic verses. I said, you said there was no stoning. Well, Book 12.2, the Book of Justice, same book, also talks about stoning. I said, you have the Book of Zakat, Book H, talks about the 7th category of giving, being those fighting the cause of Allah to establish a religion against non-Muslims. I said, how do you explain it? Will you refute this or denounce this book? He says, no, neither. I won't. And then he started talking about Muslim and Bukhari, but he went back to earlier verses. These are verses that are no longer in authority to deceive the audience. So I let him go on for about 3 minutes. I respectfully stood back up and I said, sir, I said, this book has ijtihad and it has ijma, it has consensus. I said, it has scholarly consensus, you know it and I know it, why are you deceiving the audience? I was approached by a professor at UCF, I was told that I could no longer ask another question to sit down. They had explained the rules of engagement, you'll see on the YouTube video. Well, what happened was they violated their own rules. Those that were friendly to those on the panel were allowed to follow up questions. So we were supposed to ask a question, we were no longer allowed to follow up with a question, but they violated their own rules for the whole session, so then at that point, those rules went out the window. So I stood back up after he went on, said it again. 3 officers grabbed me, walked me out of the room, and told me I had 15 minutes to leave a tax-funded university, a university that this Islamist is deceiving our students, said he had spoke to over 256 colleges that year. 256 colleges. So what you're dealing with is we have control at our universities that are conducting monologues, not dialogues. They are monologues that silence anybody with the facts to refute what's being said in the room. And this goes on day after day after day. I want to play a couple clips, audio, I'd like you to listen to. This is one from 2009. Everybody remember they had Muslim Capital Day in Washington, D.C., where 50,000 Muslims were supposed to be there? Well, we drove all night, we're there. And we did a few videos. Now on YouTube, you can see them. And we asked questions of those groups. Now, only 2,500 Islamists were there. Most of these were radical groups. Some of them were Jamaat al-Fukr, which had 50 terrorist training camps on U.S. soil. I spoke to one of those, interviewed one of those terrorists. The closest camp here in Florida is in Jessup, Georgia. The next one's in Commerce, Georgia. York, South Carolina, Red House, Virginia, and so on. This group alone has conducted over 50 violent acts on U.S. soil, to include murder, firebombing a hotel, car bombings, and embezzling money, and so on. So that's Jamaat al-Fukr, what's known as Muslims Americans, and Sheikh Mubarak Jelani, who was believed to be responsible for beheading the Wall Street journalist Daniel Pearl, is the head of this group. And he talks that you can find us in our Quranic universities in South Carolina, Virginia, upstate New York, Canada. So this is a pretty friendly group. But I want to let you listen to 1 or 2 of the videos here real quick, and tell me if you can hear the audio. So he was not conducting what he could have been doing was Islamic. He could have been waging using deception, what we call takia, or deception by half-truth, lying by omission. Kitman, which is one side of the line by telling partial truths or half-truths. So when Muslims talk about the early peaceful verse, they're employing a type of lying, kitman, lying by omission, because they understand that there's a second, basically. Dr. Bill Warren likes to say two Qurans. There's an early Medina verse, which is the peaceful Quran, and then you got the later one. It's all one Quran, but the later verses abrogate, have authority over those earlier verses. So as an Islamist, I'm going to tell you about those early peaceful verses, and I'm going to lie by omission, because I'm not going to hurt the spread of Islam. I'm not going to commit slander or say something that Islam would not like, a fellow Muslim would not like, or anything that's going to hurt the spread of Islam. So that's one way of employing deception. So that's one aspect. This guy didn't quite do that. That was in Washington, D.C. I've got dozens and dozens of videos. Anybody, right here, we're close to Orlando. Anybody know the Goldenrod Mosque over here, the Imam Masri's out of? I took a team in there, 6 guys went in. We have fake names, and so we know what's going on. And we had a gentleman who is a former member of British Parliament, George Galloway is his name. He was coming to the United States to raise money for Hamas. He was visiting our mosque and raising millions of dollars. So we knew that he was coming to the Orlando Mosque because we're on their mailing list. And so we walked in like we own the place, walked in with 2 camera crews, very overt. Assalamu alaikum, alaikum assalam. We walk in the door, they said, what are you doing here? I said, Mom Mustard told set up. I point over there, set your camera there. So we just act like we own the place. Set up 300 Muslims, some from Palestine, and Mahdi Bray, who's doing recruitment work inside the prisons. They come in and they do a 3-hour thing when Obama was just elected. This happened in 2009. We sat on the video for approximately a year. Do you remember the boat that tried to break the blockade into Israel that was raided and Hoodwink was on? Our money and cash was on that boat. So we held on to it for close to a year before, and we turned it into the FBI, the Treasury, and the IRS. They went after it, and they banned George Galloway from the United States. Thank goodness, so he's no longer coming back raising these funds. But this is the mosque right here in Orlando that raised $55,000, and you can view the video. Just type in Google, Orlando Mosque Busted. You will see the video, and you'll see what is going on. This is the same imam who sat on the Florida Census, and the Florida Sunshine Census, and in another council, Neighborhood and Faith-Based Outreach under Governor Chris. So this was our go-to guy for the state of Florida. This is our model. His mosque is owned by the North American Islamic Trust, a Muslim Brotherhood entity. So we know it is a Muslim Brotherhood front group. We know that that imam is a Muslim brother factually. And he sits on 2 of the major boards and our go-to guy for the state of Florida. You've got a lady in the next county over, Marion County, Manalfa Corey. I wrote an article on her, and I have tons of stuff on her. And she sits on the board with Ahmed Badir, who is formerly CARE, Tampa's communication director. Ahmed Badir started a little group called United Voices for America. Sounds really patriotic. And Ahmed Badir also started a group called the Capital Leadership Academy, where he takes young Islamists from 12 to 18 years old and teaches them about our legislative process in Tallahassee for a week to 2 weeks. He wants them to get into office, and I put an undercover there for 2 of these school sessions. One of my guys ended up becoming very close to, I don't want to say what, because it was very close to him. I don't want him to get identified. Let's just put it this way. Ahmed Badir said, I want clean Muslims, meaning Muslims, no ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, in political office in the next 2 years. That was over a couple of years ago. His Capital Leadership Academy, the first year was in Florida in 2009. The second year he had one in Florida and in Washington, D.C. Third year he had one in Florida, Washington, D.C., and Missouri. And right now there are 25 states that have Capital Leadership Academies teaching Islamists how to infiltrate our political system, political warfare inside the United States. Now understand that the Muslim Brotherhood was birthed in Egypt only about a little over 80 years ago. Egypt fell politically to the Muslim Brotherhood through elections in less than 80 years. How did that happen? The Egyptian government understood the Muslim Brotherhood was a revolutionary ideology. They understood that they were a violent ideology. Hassan al-Banna was killed because he tried to assassinate and did assassinate Egyptian leaders. Sayyid Qutb, who visited the United States, Ayman Zawahiri, credits Sayyid Qutb, which is a contemporary of Hassan al-Banna. He wrote a thing called Milestones. Anybody should read this. And it's milestones, stages, gradual stages of how we're going to destroy. One of the things I like to say is, you guys have all the watches, but we have all the time. Increments, stages, time. We don't care how long it takes, but America will fall to Islam. We will be an Islamic nation. And it's done in stages. This right here operationalizes how to do it. And then Shamim Siddiqui wrote another book called Methodology of Dawah, which actually operationalize how to infiltrate into our church, how to infiltrate into our political system, how to infiltrate into our schools. And this is why the Council on Islamic Education right now, this is a book on all 27 books in Florida, history and social studies, of all egregious false information being taught in these books. Act for America did a study on all 38 major textbooks being used throughout the nation by all 6 major publishers. Things being taught that Jesus was a Palestinian and Muslims discovered America are some of the things being taught in public school textbooks today, right now. Brevard County just banned one of the books, and Miami banned 3 of the books' textbooks. They are indoctrinating our children, and the guy that's in charge of that, the Council on Islamic Education, Shabir Mansouri, he said, quote, "I am waging a bloodless revolution promoting world cultures and faiths in America's public schools." His affiliate website, called soundvision.com, tells children from elementary, middle school, and high school how to insinuate Sharia into the classroom, how to get Islamic calendars into there, how to get hijabs into the classroom, how to get special prayer time, which is all Sharia compliant, submission to Sharia. And I submit that our textbooks have already submitted to Sharia Islamic law because they are telling our children what we're allowed to know about jihad and what we're allowed to know about Islam and what we're not, because it is not a factual narrative. It is a counterfactual narrative that's being taught to our children, and this started many, many years ago. So this is what's going on. Shabir Mansouri said that. Then you have soundvision.com. On their website, it says that America's public schools are fertile grounds where the seeds of Islam can be sowed into the hearts of non-Muslims. Now, that doesn't sound like education. That sounds like indoctrination to me. And just recently, I've got a video and audio, which I've edited in Volusia County, the next county over, because they were fighting this textbook. And the ACLU invited the president of the mosque, the Deberry Mosque, the Mosque of Miriam, and the Islamic Center of Deberry, I'm sorry. Anybody know Mr. Qureshi? Riyad Qureshi? Well, he came in. He was asked, first of all, he espoused all the public talking points for the publisher about the book and defended it. One of my guys simply asked him, did you read that textbook yourself? He hadn't even read it. And he had espoused that we need to go through the information at the school board meetings, that we need to have a factual understanding, that, we're just being hate mongers, you got to read it, and it's good stuff, and he stood behind it. I stood up and asked him about those quotes, and I told him, I said, I think, first of all, we should be teaching a lot more about Islam. I think it should be a major topic in every school, but a factual narrative of it. What Islam is, what Sharia is, and what the threat doctrine is. Absolutely, we should be teaching it. Factually. I said, but when I hear these things, I said, that sounds more like indoctrination. I said, than education. Would you agree that parents, if those statements were true? He said, well, I don't know, I can't verify it. I said, if those statements were true, do you agree that American parents should be concerned? Immediately, the head of the ACLU stepped in and tried to say, well, I think what you just witnessed here was the free marketplace of ideas. And how do you think Christianity got started in Europe and all this other stuff? And I said, wait a minute, time out. This isn't the college level. This isn't the marketplace war of ideas. This is a middle school, high school. These are children who don't have the knowledge or sophistication, and they're being taught out of books that they believe are authoritative in nature, by teachers that are authoritative in nature, and they don't have the sophistication to determine yet. I said, now my question to the imam was, and I wrote it back to him, and when I asked him, here's what he said. He said, a bloodless revolution? A bloodless revolution? Well, if it's bloodless, yes, we should be doing this in the schools. Absolutely. He believed in indoctrination. So you have the ACLU and the imam saying that basically we should be waging a bloodless revolution inside the schools. Basically, they are after the hearts and minds of our children, as specified by the Muslim Brotherhood. This is going on every single day, and it's your children and your grandchildren that are at stake, whose hearts and minds are being lost. And what happened was, and how did we get in this situation? We got into this situation because in 1958, America set up the National Education Defense Act. And the National Education Defense Act was to train people to speak Persian Farsi so we could have intelligence and counterintelligence operatives to work throughout the Middle East and have a footing. What happened was the Saudis understood that if they could commandeer what was going on and commandeer the education system and fund that other 90%, they could control who was teaching and what was being taught. And they started at Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, Hartford, Princeton, those schools. They knew that those people would be the leaders of our day. So they started doing this. So today, Harvard, optional to take constitutional studies to be a lawyer at Harvard. Optional. Sharia compliant finance, mandatory at Harvard. mandatory. How does that happen? Sharia-compliant finance has only been in the United States for less than 10 years. $2.4 trillion a year come through the United States, and all Muslims who do Sharia-compliant instruments have to give 2.5% of their annual wealth to zakat. And remember, one of those categories is terrorism. And they have Sharia-compliant boards that ensure the money goes to where it's supposed to go. AIG, Chase Manhattan, HSBC, UBS, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all those banks offer Sharia-compliant products. You bank with them, you are funding what we call terrorism against ourselves, factually. What time is it, sir? 8:15? Am I boring anybody? Okay, I don't want, am I really getting anybody really angry?
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody doubt what I'm saying? Because if you do, I really want you to question me. Because what I'm speaking about is factual, and if you don't believe it, if you have anything, please question me and bring it up. If you question the veracity of what I'm saying, please challenge me. I welcome you to challenge me. I would hope that we have more people who are on the fence or on the other side of these rooms, because they need to understand what's going on and how they're being used. The other thing that we have to understand, as I said before, the second largest group in the world today is OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperative, made up of 57 Islamic states. They are the largest voting bloc inside the United Nations. The Islamist nations are driving the train. And some people say, well, you know, Marxism and Islamism are incompatible. Not so. Islam actually takes credit for tribalism, communalism, communism. They've spoken about it and said that stems from Islam itself. If you look at Article 2 of the Egyptian Constitution, prior to it falling, prior to the Arab Spring or uprising or democracy, whatever you want to call it, what that was, it said, this Article 2 of the Egyptian Constitution, that we are a democratic, socialist, Islamic state ruled by Sharia. So how can you be democratic, socialist, Islamic state ruled by Sharia law? Because their words and our words are different. Now, if you look at the Ikhwan website, or the Muslim Brotherhood International website, it used words mirror imaging. Remember, Egypt said we are the Freedom and Justice Party. And everybody in America went, yeah, they're just like us. They want freedom. They want justice. Right? You have to understand the freedom they were talking about was freedom from man-made law. Because it's the highest form of disbelief and oppression in Islam, man-made law. So they wanted freedom from man-made law and justice in accordance with Sharia Islamic law. That's what they were talking about. And that's who was elected. And they were surprised when Mubarak went more Sharia compliant. Well, he told you what he was doing. You just didn't understand the language. Again, we have to understand the language of the enemy. We have to understand that they use words, mirror imaging, words that we in the West find very palatable. And we hear one thing, but they mean something else. That's the war that we're waging. It's an information battle. And we have to get our critical thought back. We have to get, I look like a dog. I got a buddy, his dog comes in, wagging his tail, and he's going, hey, stupid. How you doing, you dummy? And the dog's sitting there wagging its tail all excited because he's talking in a nice voice. And he says it pleasantly. He's got a pedigree. Just because someone speaks eloquently, just because someone has a PhD behind their name, just because they don't raise their voice, they get angry. How do you think it's done? When we do counterintelligence operations and go into other countries, the first thing we do is we pick out our targets. We find out everything about that target. I become their best friend. And then I use that information to manipulate and twist it against them. That's how espionage is done, and counter-espionage, and counter those types of operations, influence operations are done. Ahmed Badir brags about it in Tampa. He says, before I go into an office, this was through my source that was inside the class, when I look at an elected official, we go in with complaints. We go in saying, we want this, we want it now, why aren't you doing it? And we wonder why they're turned off, why we don't get our way. They go in and they've already done their work, and as long as it doesn't violate Sharia law, they go in and say, you know, I've been watching you, you've got this bill you need help with. Well, how you doing, sir? My name is Ahmed Badir. I've got like 50 followers, and I've been watching that bill. How can I help you get that passed? Can we go knock doors in this election to help you out? Can we help you out? He builds rapport. He does something for him. He said, I might do that 2 or 3 times before I ever ask for anything. And then when I do, it's very small. He's built up a trust. He's built a relationship. So once that relationship's established, and he goes in and asks for something, guess what? It's much easier. Or if you go in with someone like me, And I hate naming names, but I'm going to name a name because this guy deserves it. Dennis Baxley. Anybody know Dennis Baxley? Over here in Keller? He was former president of Christian Coalition. He's one of our House reps. Walked in with Manalfa Corey. She's in Marion County. Some of you said you knew her. I've got pictures of Manalfa Corey I've taken off her Facebook site. She posted. She's sitting at the desk of the former president of the PLO, Abu Abbas, who's still president, rather, who was elected to government in Palestine. Then you have Yasser Arafat, everybody knows as a terrorist. I've got pictures in front of his mural beaming at every chance, dozens of pictures. I've got pictures on things saying to exist is to resist. She sits on the board of the Capital Leadership Academy of Ahmed Hamas entity. She sits on the board of United Voices for America. And you start connecting all these dots, and she's working with other Islamists, dozens of them. I do a 2-hour brief connecting all the dots. He says, Randy, I know Badir's bad. Everything you said, I believe all these documents you're showing me, all these pictures, there's proofs, this and this, and I understand that he's bad, but I know Manal. I just don't think she wants to wear a burqa. All logic went out the window, and the influence operation was successful. Because instead of looking and connecting the dots and the facts, and that's how a successful influence operation works. You're befriended. Did you have a personal experience with a Muslim? How do you know he's a bad guy? You don't, look, he's just like us. He wants democracy. He told you that. Well, again, Egypt had a democracy. But what kind of democracy was it? The democracy they're talking about was the democracy of the scholars, the Shura councils. They don't get to vote. Every country. And the other fact is that everybody says that every Sharia is different. Everybody heard of the Declaration of Human Rights inside the United Nations that guarantees all these great humanity, all these rights? Well, guess what? The Muslim nations, all 57 Islamic states, would not sign off on that Declaration of Human Rights. Instead, they wrote their own, called the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights. And they included all those terms of inclusion for human rights, but they followed them up by a term of exclusion. They wrote in accordance with Sharia law. So they gave all these beautiful rights, and then they termed it right after that in accordance with Sharia law, which just excluded and took away almost all those rights that were just guaranteed. And then they served it to the United Nations in 1993. So the United Nations is physically and factually on legal record by all 57 Islamic states stating that they signed off on the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights. What does that mean for you? So when they start genocide in Africa, the UN doesn't have a legal right to go in there and go against them because they've been served saying, we told you what we were going to do. We told you what our definition of human rights was, and you just didn't listen. Here, we're on legal record. You don't have a leg to stand on. That's the problem. And right now they're pushing UN Resolution 1618. They've tried it every single year and modified it, and it's a defamation of religions. And what they mean by defamation of religions is they mean defamation of the Islamic religion. Again, Islamic slander laws. Don't say anything that I wouldn't like. If you say something that causes a Muslim to be upset or us to riot, you draw a cartoon and we riot, you should be punished. And guess what? Hillary Clinton, when she was on the State Department, met with the president of the OIC, Ingersoll, and the head of Turkey, Erdogan, and talked about using peer pressure and shaming against Americans to silence us, saying anything critical of Islam. And then they also went on and made a veiled threat using our First Amendment rights against us. And they are enforcing it just as they did on me at UCF by using nuisance laws or disturbance laws to drag us out and silence us. And we are doing the Islamist work. Just like we are overseas right now in the Muslim Brotherhood countries, our military has been put into the service of the Muslim Brotherhood. We have no business being in those countries in those particular positions right now, and there are things that we know about. Now, my mentor, my direct mentor, in 2010 in the fall, before the Arab Spring, what they call the Arab Spring happened, was the only analyst in the world. And he briefed on the Hill and said, here's what's getting ready to happen. He not only did he say, here's what's getting ready to happen, here are the countries that are going to fall this year. And guess what? Here are the countries that aren't going to fall, and they're going to start falling the following year and the year after the monarchs. How was Major Cogman able to do that? Because he understood Islamic Sharia law. And when you understand Islamic Sharia law, you can predict and you can see what is going to happen because they tell you everything they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And it's published. So all you have to do in this audience is open your eyes, read, and use your own critical thinking abilities. And you will understand the war that we are in. But you have to understand that this is a global war. And this was a war that started at the time of the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad broke the world into two, the Dar al-Islam and the Dar al-Harb, the house of war, the house of peace. And the Dar al-Islam is to wage war against the Dar al-Harb until it comes under submission. And then, and only then, will we give world peace. So that is basically what we're looking at. So we are looking at a clash of civilizations. You want to open up for questions?
Yeah, Randy. George has got the microphone,
Sure.
and if you have a question, raise your hand.
One other thing I do want to say, this book right here, can anybody read what this says? What does this say?
The Quranic concept of war.
Do you see what this is written by General S.K. Malik. He's a general in Pakistan, our supposed ally. The name of the book is The Quranic Concept of War. They have based their whole war doctrine of that country on the Quran. So if you think that the Quran is some peaceful book of religion, talk to General S.K. Malik of Pakistan, who based the whole war doctrine on the Quran and talks about using nuclear weapons at the right time and against the Satan of the West, meaning America. This is our ally.
Okay, if you have a question, raise your hand. I'm going to pass a bucket here, fill it full, because this is going to pay their travel expenses down here. So if you just pass that along and take care of that business. We have a question.
Yes, I have a question. I appreciate very much the information you're giving, but I've known for some time Islam is not a religion of peace and that we have a war going on. But what do we do about it? How do people like us get involved in trying to educate others? Or what are the things, I mean, you've talked a lot about what's happening, and I don't think you have to convince this group. We're all convinced, but what can we do about it?
I think 2 of the 3 things you can do is, one, if you've got $29 to spare, I would encourage every one of you to go on Amazon and buy a copy of the Sharia Islamic Law Manual. 1. 2, I would ask you to write down my email, and I've got treasure troves of documents. In fact, I've got that on PDF. And if you want to learn more, we can get you more. But the first thing I would do is Act for America, which I did not get into. We are the largest group in the United States that is countering radical, what we call in America, radical Islam. We have over 820 chapters. Now, you guys are involved in enough things. We don't need to get you, necessarily. If this is your hot button, you want to start a chapter of Act for America, here in your group, somebody that maybe one of your person you want to designate to cover this topic and be part of what you do, we would love it, and I'd love to be your mentor and help you get an organization, a chapter started where you can educate here locally. And I'll be glad to come back and speak on issues at any time. But if not, at least go to our website, www.actforamerica.com or .org. Acts for America is easy to remember. And sign up to get our newsletters, because the things that we are working on are things that are going to protect America. We've already passed several laws. American laws for American courts have been passed in 7 states. We're working on the Open Fuel Standards Act. One of the things that we're doing is we know that the GM and the big motor companies are not going to retrofit cars to run on ethanol, gas, byproducts, but we're shipping vehicles, and it costs about $160 to retrofit a car. It doesn't run on either. And they're paying less than $1.75 in Brazil for cars that are buying in America. So we can do that. So what we figured is we'll do it on the state level. If we can get 6 states, we know that we can get 6 states in the United States to pass this Open Fuel Standards Act, then it's going to be too costly for them to keep manufacturing just those specific states. It's going to be easier for them to pass that and make all vehicles be able to run on either. What that's going to do is bring our gas prices down and make us less dependent on heavy oil, which is funding the jihad worldwide, globally. That's some of the things that we're doing. We've already passed when Tyson a few years ago, when we were first open, I think we only had 30,000 members. Tyson Foods enacted Eid al-Fitr in place of Labor Day. 113-year-old holiday in America, now 116. We got it overturned in 3 days. And they said, well, it was a board, and I went back and forth with a lady there that was the PR, and she said, well, they had 12 members, and some of them Muslim, they voted, and I said, it doesn't matter. There's certain things that you do on principle. I said, it's not all about the dollar. I said, some things you have to stand on, and we were able to get them to overturn that. We've done several things like that. Anybody remember Rivka Berry, the young girl that ran away from Ohio? Yeah. Okay, I was one of the people that helped save her life. That young girl came down here. John Stemberger was the legal counsel. My job was getting Governor Christ, who didn't want anything to do with it, on board. And through ACT, we were able to get 10,000 emails and phone calls in his office, and and overnight he had Rob Wheeler, which was his number 2 legal, and George Sheldon at DCF fly in for that court case, and we were able to get that young girl protected. One of my members in Jacksonville flew to every court hearing here, and then in Ohio, and then we held a rally in Ohio with Pamela Geller, and ultimately that girl is now living in the United States, free, but she was being persecuted, was going to be killed by her father, honor killed, by her brother and father. She was already blind in one eye from the beating, because she had converted to Christianity and was a closet Christian for 4 years, and her father found out. She fled for her life here in the U.S. And you guys remember Fatima in Tampa that was killed? Somehow she beat herself in a coffee table until she killed herself, but she's got broken ribs and everything else. And the people that they rescued, first responders, said, no way, it's not, that's covered up. Guess what? That's Sharia. By their hands will defeat you. We have our own, I've got a sheriff right now that I question, and he's a Christian, says he's a Christian. I voted for him, stood behind him, he's done great things for crime. I stood up to my sheriff at a Republican Club meeting because my meetings were held at the time at the Southside Republican Club. I'm a Republican. And I said, Sheriff, I said, there's no debate. You've done great things with reducing crime in Jacksonville, murder rates down, everything's down, thefts down. I said, we have another element. We're a huge, huge city. We have almost 1 million people. We have major military infrastructure. We have a port, major port. We have all types of infrastructure. And I said, we have other elements. I said, have you ever heard of Shamim Siddiqui and methodology of doubt? No. Have you heard of the strategic goals of the group in North America, which lays out the plan on how they're going to subvert, destroy, submit? No. I said, have you heard of the project? No. I said, then I started talking about the Turkish Cultural Center, and I didn't want to bring up Parvez Ahmed because our Human Rights Commissioner is the former national chairman of CARE, Hamas, and I wrote a 22-page dossier when they were going to put it through, turn into a firestorm in Jacksonville for about a month. They plastered my face on the front page of the Sunday paper trying to call me Islamophobe, although everything was factually written, brief, and I had no bigoted, racist statements, because this isn't about racism, this isn't about bigotry, this is about protecting this is Article 6 issue. The Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. Muslims, Islamists, not Muslims, but Islamists in this country who are working with the Muslim Brotherhood want to replace our Constitution and implement a parallel legal system, and ultimately, once they get the parallel legal system, like they did in Europe, they're having huge issues, it will become the only legal system, and that's the ultimate goal in stages. Right now, we just want to have marriages, we just want to have, family law practice, that's all we're looking for. And then it's a little more, and then it's a little more, and then it's a little more in stages. So I asked him this. He goes, well, if you're talking about the 2-week trip to Turkey, I was on that. I said, yes, sir. I said, and that was an influence operation. I said, whether it's effective or not remains to be seen. Now, the Turkish Cultural Center is owned by a guy named Fatah Golan. Some of you may have seen him on the news. He owns 130 charter schools in the U.S., tax-funded. He is in America under asylum under the Clintons. He came here because he tried to overthrow Turkey back in the Islamic Caliphate. He is dubbed the most dangerous man on planet Earth, and he said, quote, we, meaning Muslims, must swim in the arteries of society undetected. If we raise our heads too soon, they'll crush us, meaning Muslims are going to crush us. We must swim in the arteries of society undetected until we reach all the power centers, and then we can rear our heads. Does that sound like a moderate? This guy is now on the Turkish Cultural Center, and shortly after that, a couple months later, my sheriff is now on the advisory board of that group and has been for 2 years. That's how a successful influence operation works. This is how you put law enforcement in the pocket of the Muslim Brotherhood, and this is how you blind their eyes to what's going on. Parvez Ahmed also spoke to our Department of Children and Family Services, and I went in. Parvez looked up, saw me, immediately went to the head. I was approached by 3 people and said, you can sit here, you can record. Well, they told me I couldn't, I did it on the phone anyway. And they said, but you can't ask any questions of distributing literature. Why? He got up and spoke about the importance of not separating a Muslim child from their parent. Well, guess what? Every non-Muslim has their child separated, they're interviewed, right? This is an important intelligence gathering piece of work. So why should we not? Well, it's important because if you're jihadi, I don't want my child telling you what I'm doing. But he's in there talking about all that. That was just one little piece of the pie. But this is how it's done. Parvez Ahmed and Ahmed Badir out of Tampa were conducting sensitivity cultural training, the same training that he just did, I just told you at our DCF. They were conducting that to law enforcement throughout the state of Florida and to the FBI up until 2009, when CARE was designated a co-conspirator in in the largest terrorism finance trial case in U.S. history, the Holy Land I mentioned earlier. And the FBI Director Mueller severed all ties with CARE at that point. At that point, Parvez Ahmed was no longer allowed to teach inside the sheriff's office. That's the level. So you had the bad guys teaching, and now, at the national level, the guys that I trained under, the guys that were accredited, and by the way, John Wandola, and I encourage everyone, this probably is the single best book you can buy. You want to know what you can do? Buy this book tonight, and there are only 8 copies. Get one of these in the hands of your sheriff. I think I've already gave one to Jared to do that. This right here is written for military, for you guys to understand, to get your local leadership, your military intelligence officers to understand what's going on. Now, to tell you how bad this is, John Wandola, just to let you know, and Steve Cogman, my 2 guys, they were my direct trainers and mentors. The former Central Intelligence Agency Director, the former Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency Director, the former Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, General Jerry Boykin, Delta Force, also in the CIA, all of them, including Ed Schnitz, also the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, said although all of us were in senior levels of intelligence and should have known this information, we did not. And they went on to say that John Wandola, that's my direct trainer and mentor, and Steve Cogman are our go-to guys for anything considering Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood. That's pretty profound.
Do we have any other questions?
Is that the best reference for local who's involved with some of these organizations?
I think if you can get this in your hands, your leaders and sheriffs, yes, ma'am. This is one good book. The other book one is called Sharia Law for Non-Muslims. It's only 47 pages. And if Jared gets a hold of me, we can get them to you through ACT for like $3 a book or $3.50 a book versus $8.50 online.
Okay, whoever's got the mic can talk. Nobody else can at this point.
Do you have any evidence for possibly the counseling our Commander-in-Chief is receiving through the Muslim Brotherhood that might be impacting rules of engagement with our military?
Well, all you have to do is look at the rules of engagement. You understand that we're not on a level playing field. So as far as that goes, here's what I know. If you look at the Marxist Islamist in chief, and I call him Marxist Islamist, I don't know who he prays to. I can say he's a Christian, he's a Muslim, I don't care. What I do know is that he follows Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals or rules for revolutionaries, it was formerly named. I understand that he supports the Muslim Brotherhood at every chance that he gets. So you see him supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, and if you look back at his 2009 Cairo speech, he basically gave the green light which caused the Arab Spring to initiate, in my opinion. If you listen to his language and understand the doublespeak, you go back and listen to it. He was telling them basically, I'm going to support you. And he said as much in his book. In his own autobiography, he wrote, when the political winds shift, I will side with the Muslims. That's what I know. Factual. And that's enough.
Who's that again?
What's that?
The name?
Of this book?
The person?
That's what Barack Obama.
So I'm talking about, I guess who you're...
Yeah, that was Barack Obama.
Do you have any printed information with some of these front groups that
Yes.
are local and that are available?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
If you email me, at Jacksonville is my email, @jacksonville@gmail.com. So if you want any information, if you want any books, I'll be more than happy to provide it to you. Just email me at actjacksonville, all written out one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know anything about?
Okay, let's have one last
Hello.
One last question.
Yes. The Arab uprising that was in Egypt,
Yes, sir.
if they all are underneath the Sharia law, what group overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood? Because did you say they were just on different levels?
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood, yes, the group that's going to come, you're never going to see a moderate group. So what you're looking at right now, Mubarak was removed, and you're going to see probably a little bit more moderate group. But you have to understand, Egypt was already a Sharia compliant country. Article 2 of their declaration said we were Sharia compliant, right? Article 2 under the Mubarak regime said we are a democratic, socialist, Islamic state ruled by Sharia law. It was already there. The only thing you're going to see is they continue to march more Sharia compliant typically.
But the Brotherhood got thrown out.
Correct, because they moved too far too fast.
Oh.
It's like moving like Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is in third phase jihad. There's no backing down. We're a complete 100% offensive jihad. Remember there's 3 stages. There's the Dawah stage, like the Prophet did the first 13 years. Then there's the defensive jihad. You moved to Medina, and we went out and raided caravans. We killed the men, we took the women as sex slaves and concubines, we took the wealth, the prophet got 20%, everybody else divvied it up, it was a pretty good way to make money. And we came back and we were oppressed because we had these non-Muslims coming through our lands and caravanning through us, and we weren't, so we were on defensive jihad. We went out that, but we were just defending ourselves. We were being oppressed and affiliated. Then once he came into the third phase jihad, we went into Mecca, back with an army controlled, and now we're in offensive jihad. Well, Al-Qaeda believes they're in the third phase of jihad. The Muslim Brotherhood of the United States, they believe they're coming out of the Dawah phase and just entering the defensive phase. So we're just starting to move out. Europe's actually a little ahead of us in that. So you look at London, France, they're really moved into the second phase of jihad. The only difference, again, between jihadis here in the United States and Hezbollah, Hamas, and Al-Qaeda are tactics and timing. But they all believe the same Sharia, and they all believe in establishing Sharia worldwide in the global Islamic State. That's the fundamental.
So the organization, the groups that overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, just is in a different phase, but they
Pretty much.
they felt as though that group was too far ahead, they took too many liberties to begin with, and so they wanted to replace them.
My Sharia is better than your Sharia. The Shias, typically supposed to be more moderate. People say, look to the Shias. And I tell people two things, factually, real quick. 80% of the Islamic world follows Sunni. Where's the birthplace of the Sunni? Where's the birthplace of Islam? Anybody? Saudi Arabia. What do they do in Saudi Arabia if you commit a capital crime? Do they cut off your hands and chop square? They cut your heads off? So for stealing, they cut your hand off, right? For committing a capital offense, they behead you, right? So demonstratively, you know that the Sunnis that believe in Sharia law, all the Sharia law is the same, 80% of the Sunni world follow that doctrine. Go over to Iran. What happens if you commit a crime, major crime, capital crime? Do they kill you? They stone you? Do they kill you there? So that's Shia. That's the Persian area. That's Iraq. That's Iran. Aren't they just as radical, just about? I mean, they follow the same Sharia doctrine, right? So demonstratively, that 20% of the world follows the same Sharia that this was, with minor differences. My Sharia is a little better than you. I follow Ali, the bloodline of Ali. You guys follow Uthman and Bakr and all these guys. Well, ours is better because we follow this line. Ours is better because we follow this line. But we all have unanimous agreement on what Sharia is and is not.
What's the status with our state legislature? I heard there.
Hopefully, we're about 70% sure we're going to pass that. Is there any
Now, I'll
other?
take one more question. Anyone has a last question?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that why Barack Obama said we had 57 states?
Yeah. I can't speak for what he said, but that was a pretty good slip.
Yeah.
And I think that would be, at this point, when you look back in retrospect, I think it was a pretty good tell.
Okay, let's wrap it up. Let's give Randy a big round of applause.
This book is a lot of excellent copies by John Blondolo, right here, this book right here, if anybody wants a copy. They're $15 plus tax and shipping on Amazon. If you want them signed, I'll give it to you for $20. I have 8. And this money will go directly to John, actually.
It's a great deal, folks. One thing to bring this home. This is the third event we've had since last year on Islam and Muslim Brotherhood.
Same thing.
This afternoon, I got a call from a care official. He wants to come here. I talked to Randy, said the thing to do would set up a debate. But we're on the radar now. There's a presentation that Jonathan Matuzes made last week in Eustis. Muslim Brotherhood from around the country have sent over 50 emails, letters to the sponsor of that event. So they are pushing back. We have to push back too. Thank you very much, sports.